No one noticed him at first. In a place where survival depends on intimidation, noise, and reputation, he looked like nothing special, quiet, reserved, almost invisible. The kind of man people overlook without a second thought. And in prison, being overlooked often makes you a target. The bullies noticed him before anyone else did. They scanned the room the way predators do, searching for weakness, for hesitation, for someone who wouldn't fight back. Their eyes landed on him, sitting alone, calm, unbothered, saying nothing. To them, silence meant fear. Calm meant surrender. And they smiled. What better way to entertain themselves than to humiliate someone in front of everyone? They started small, mocking comments, laughter just loud enough to be heard, subtle moves meant to provoke a reaction. A shoulder bump here, a sneer there. The kind of psychological pressure designed to break a person without leaving visible marks. Around them, other inmates watched quietly, already predicting the outcome. This was how things usually went. But the man didn't react. Steven Seagal remained still, his expression unchanged, his posture relaxed. No anger, no panic, not even irritation, just quiet awareness. And that confused them. The bullies pushed further. They believed they were in control. They believed this man was already defeated. After all, they had power, numbers, and a reputation. He had none of that, or so it seemed. They had no idea that calm wasn't weakness. It was calculation. What they couldn't see was the discipline behind his stillness. The years of control, the mental conditioning, the ability to remain composed under pressure that would shake most people. While they were acting on impulse and ego, he was observing every movement, every breath, every mistake. The room felt different now. Laughter faded into uneasy silence. Something was off. The tension grew heavier with every second that passed, as if the air itself was waiting for something to happen. Still, the bullies mistook this silence for fear. They didn't realize they had already crossed a line, because the moment they chose to humiliate him, they set in motion something they were completely unprepared for. The atmosphere began to change, slowly at first, then all at once. What started as casual mockery no longer felt playful. The bullies sensed it too, though none of them wanted to admit it. Something about the way Steven Seagal sat there, calm, unmoving, completely unaffected, felt wrong. In prison, reactions matter. Fear shows itself. Anger explodes. Submission breaks people down. But this silence didn't fit any pattern they understood. And that made them uncomfortable. They raised their voices, tried to reclaim control of the moment. Jokes turned sharper. Insults grew louder. The kind meant not just to humiliate, but to provoke a response. Any response. Around them, conversation stopped. Eyes shifted. Even the background noise of the room seemed to fade, as if everyone sensed that something unpredictable was unfolding. Still, Steven did nothing. He didn't look away. He didn't challenge them either. His eyes remained steady, focused, not aggressive, just aware. It wasn't defiance. It was something far more unsettling. Confidence without display. To the bullies, this felt like disrespect. One of them stepped closer, invading his personal space, expecting flinching, hesitation, fear. That's how it usually went. That's how power worked here. But Steven didn't move an inch. No tension in his shoulders. No tightening of his jaw. Just controlled breathing and quiet presence. That was when doubt began to creep in. Not fear. Not yet, but doubt. The kind that unsettles the mind. The kind that makes you question whether you've misjudged the situation. And in a place ruled by dominance, doubt is dangerous. They try to laugh it off, pretending they were still in control. But the laughter sounded forced now, hollow. Others noticed it too. The energy had shifted. The balance felt unstable, like a structure built on arrogance that was starting to crack. What they didn't understand was that Steven wasn't ignoring them. He was reading them. Every movement, every shift in posture, every careless step forward fueled by ego. Years of experience had trained him to remain calm in chaos, to let others reveal themselves while he conserved energy. While they were acting on impulse, he was already 10 steps ahead. Time seemed to stretch. Seconds felt longer. The room felt tighter. Even the bullies began to sense that pushing further might lead somewhere they couldn't control. But pride wouldn't let them stop. Backing down would mean losing face, and in prison, that loss can follow you forever. So they pressed on, closer, louder, more aggressive in tone, though still careful not to cross obvious lines. They believed they were escalating pressure. In reality, they were exposing their own lack of control. Steven finally shifted slightly, not dramatically, not threateningly, just enough to signal awareness, just enough to let them know he was present, fully present. That subtle movement did more than any display of anger ever could. It sent a quiet message that landed deep in their minds. This man was not afraid, and worse for them, he was waiting. The tension now hung heavy, undeniable. Every person watching knew something was coming, though no one could predict what form it would take. The bullies had started something they could no longer undo. They still believed they had the upper hand, but the truth was far more unsettling. They weren't in control anymore, and they were about to realize it. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt deliberate. Steven Seagal's slight movement, barely noticeable, had changed everything. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't a threat. Yet somehow, it landed heavier than any insult or raised fist ever could. The bullies felt it immediately, even if they couldn't explain why. Their confidence wavered. They had expected fear. They had expected resistance. What they hadn't expected was control. Real control, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that sits quietly and waits while others unravel. One of them spoke again, louder than before, forcing a grin that no longer reaches eyes. The words were meant to dominate, to reassert authority. But the sound echoed awkwardly in the room, met with no laughter this time. No encouragement, just watching eyes and held breaths. Steven didn't respond. Instead, he slowly raised his head and met their gaze. Not with anger, not with arrogance, but with calm certainty. His eyes weren't searching. They weren't reactive. They were steady, focused, and unsettlingly composed. That look did something to them. It made them feel exposed. In prison, power often comes from unpredictability, from chaos, from making others uncomfortable. But Steven wasn't uncomfortable. He wasn't rushed. He wasn't emotional. And that stripped away their advantage. Their minds began racing, searching for meaning where none was being offered. Who stays this calm? Why isn't he reacting? What does he know that we don't? Those questions crept in uninvited, and once they did, they refused to leave. Steven's calm wasn't accidental. It was practiced. Years of discipline had taught him that the mind always moves before the body. Whoever controls the moment controls the outcome. While the bullies fed on impulse and ego, he was rooted in awareness, reading them with effortless precision. One of them shifted his stance, subtly adjusting his footing. Another clenched his jaw. Small signs, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but to Steven, they told a clear story. Nervous energy, uncertainty, doubt trying to hide behind bravado. The balance of power was changing. The room seemed to recognize it before the bullies did. Conversations didn't resume. No one looked away. Everyone sensed they were witnessing something rare. Not an explosion of violence, but the quiet collapse of assumed dominance. Steven finally spoke. His voice was low, controlled, measured. No shouting, no insults, just a few calm words delivered without emotion. The content hardly mattered. What mattered was how he said them. The confidence, the timing, the complete lack of fear. It wasn't a challenge. It was a statement. That was the moment the bullies truly understood they had made a mistake. They had mistaken silence for weakness, stillness for submission, calm for fear. And now, standing face to face with someone who clearly wasn't intimidated, they felt the ground shift beneath them. Backing down now would cost them respect, but pushing forward felt dangerous. They hesitated. That hesitation was everything. In a place where dominance relies on momentum, hesitation breaks the spell. It exposes uncertainty. It invites scrutiny. And everyone watching saw it happen in real time. Steven remained exactly where he was, relaxed, balanced, fully present. He didn't need to move. He didn't need to prove anything. His composure did the work for him, radiating a quiet authority that filled the space. The bullies exchanged quick glances. Unspoken communication passed between them. They were reassessing, recalculating, trying to regain control of a situation that was slipping away faster than they could manage. And that was when the truth finally settled in. This man wasn't trapped in here with them. They were trapped in this moment with him. The psychological shift was complete. What had begun as an attempt at humiliation had turned into something far more unsettling. A confrontation where power had silently changed hands. No blows had been thrown. No threats had been made. Yet everyone knew, without question, that the outcome was no longer in doubt. The calm man they had targeted was no victim. He was the one setting the pace now. And whatever came next would happen on his terms. As the tension lingered, something subtle but powerful began to surface. Understanding. The bullies had paused, not because they chose to, but because something inside them demanded it. Instinct. The same instinct that tells predators when prey is no longer vulnerable. They couldn't explain it, but they felt it clearly now. This situation was not unfolding the way it should. Steven Seagal stood there, calm and grounded, as if the chaos around him barely existed. But beneath that still exterior was a history they couldn't see, a depth of experience that shaped every breath, every movement, every second of restraint. This calm wasn't luck. It was earned. Long before this moment, Steven had learned that real strength isn't loud. It doesn't rush. It waits. Years of intense discipline had taught him how to stay composed when pressure builds, how to control fear rather than be controlled by it. He understood that the mind is the first battlefield, and once it's lost, everything else follows. The bullies, on the other hand, had lived by reaction, force, noise, reputation. They believed dominance was something you display. Steven knew it was something you embody. And now, that difference was impossible to ignore. As he stood there, fully present, the room seemed to revolve around him. People watching began to sense that this wasn't just another confrontation. It was a lesson unfolding in real time, a quiet demonstration of what happens when discipline meets arrogance. Steven didn't need to explain who he was. He didn't need to boast or threaten. His posture alone spoke volumes. There was balance in the way he stood, awareness in the way he observed. Every part of him appeared intentional. Even his stillness carried weight. To those trained to notice such things, it was obvious. This man had spent a lifetime mastering control, not just of his body, but of his emotions, his reactions, his presence. The bullies began to notice it too. One of them shifted again, uneasy now, sensing that the advantage they thought they had was never really theirs. Another avoided eye contact for just a second too long. These were small details, but they mattered. They revealed uncertainty, and uncertainty is contagious. Steven noticed everything. He understood that fear often disguises itself as aggression, that those who try the hardest to dominate are often the most insecure. And as the bullies struggled to maintain their image, their movements became less coordinated, less confident. They were unraveling, slowly, quietly from the inside. Steven's calm acted like a mirror, reflecting their lack of control back at them. The more composed he remained, the more exposed they felt. It was psychological pressure without force, authority without violence. And it was working. The room felt different now, not charged with hostility, but with realization. Even those watching from a distance could sense the shift. This wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about understanding who truly held power in the moment. Steven finally spoke again, not to provoke, but to clarify. His words were few, deliberate, and steady. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult them. He simply set a boundary, calmly, confidently, without emotion. The message was unmistakable. This ends here. And strangely enough, they listened. Not because they were told to, but because they felt they had no better option. They had underestimated him, and now they were paying the price. Not with pain, but with awareness. Awareness that they were no longer in control of the narrative. Awareness that continuing would only deepen their mistake. Steven remained still, unwavering, as if he had already moved on mentally. For him, the The confrontation was already resolved. He had made his point without needing to escalate, without needing to prove anything. That was the real revelation. Power doesn't need permission. It doesn't seek attention, and it doesn't reveal itself until it must. The bullies backed away, not dramatically, not publicly, but enough. Enough for everyone to see that something had changed. Enough for respect to replace ridicule. What they had intended as humiliation had turned into a moment of clarity. And in that moment, everyone understood the truth. They hadn't just misjudged a man. They had awakened one. For a brief moment, no one moved. The bullies stood frozen, caught between instinct and pride. They had come too far to pretend nothing happened. Yet every signal in the room warned them not to push any further. The balance had shifted, and they could feel it. Power no longer belonged to whoever was loudest or most aggressive. It belonged to the one who remained unshaken. Steven Seagal didn't advance. He didn't threaten. He didn't even raise his voice. And that restraint unsettled them more than any aggressive reaction ever could. This was the turning point, the moment where choices mattered. One path led to escalation, embarrassment, and loss of control. The other led to quiet retreat, wounded pride, and survival. In prison, those decisions are made in seconds, often driven by ego. But ego was exactly what had betrayed them. One of the bullies tried to recover the situation with a dismissive laugh, waving a hand as if to signal that it was all meaningless. But the sound lacked confidence. It fooled no one. His body language told the real story. Tense shoulders, shallow breathing, eyes darting for validation that never came. Steven watched calmly. He understood this moment well. It was the instant when people realize they've miscalculated. When arrogance meets consequence, not through punishment, but through awareness. He had seen it many times before, in different places, under different circumstances. And it always unfolded the same way. Those who recognize the mistake early walk away. Those who don't regret it. Steven took a single step forward. Not aggressive, not fast, just intentional. The movement was subtle, but it carried weight. It wasn't meant to intimidate. It was meant to close the conversation. That step said everything. It said, this goes no further. It said, I'm in control now. It said, choose wisely. The bullies felt it immediately. Their bravado evaporated under the pressure of that calm certainty. They weren't facing someone acting on emotion. They were facing someone who understood timing, presence, and consequence. Silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't tense with uncertainty. It was heavy with resolution. One by one, the bullies stepped back. Not dramatically, not in defeat, but enough. Enough to signal surrender without admitting it. Enough to preserve whatever dignity they could salvage. Steven stopped moving. He didn't pursue. He didn't comment. He didn't need to. The moment had passed, and the message had been delivered. Continuing would serve no purpose. True control knows when to stop. Around them, the watchers slowly exhaled. Conversations cautiously resumed. The environment returned to motion, but something had undeniably changed. The air carried a quiet understanding, an unspoken acknowledgement of what had just occurred. This wasn't a victory celebrated with noise. It was a victory felt in silence. The bullies avoided eye contact now, not out of fear, but out of recognition. They had encountered someone operating on a different level, someone who didn't need dominance to command respect. Steven returned to his place, posture relaxed, expression unchanged. To anyone watching casually, it might have seemed like nothing happened. But those who understood power knew better. A boundary had been drawn, and it had been respected. From that moment forward, Steven's presence carried weight. Not because of what he did, but because of what he chose not to do. In an environment where escalation is expected, restraint becomes a statement. And that statement echoes longer than force ever could. The bullies had come seeking humiliation. Instead, they left with clarity. They learned that strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits patiently until the moment demands it. And when that moment arrives, it never needs to repeat itself. The confrontation was over, but its impact was just beginning. Steven Seagal's return to his place was quiet, almost ordinary. No dramatic pause, No triumphant glance back. He moved with the same calm presence he had maintained from the start, as if nothing worth remembering had occurred. But everyone in the room knew better. Something fundamental had shifted. In an environment where reputation spreads faster than truth, moments like this don't disappear. They linger. They travel quietly from person to person, stripped of exaggeration, shaped instead by respect. No one needed to explain what happened. Those who witnessed it understood instinctively, and those who didn't would feel the change soon enough. The bullies felt it first. They kept their distance now, not because they were afraid, but because they were aware. Awareness changes behavior. It sharpens caution. It rewrites assumptions. They no longer saw Steven as an easy target or a silent figure to be tested. They saw him as someone who had drawn a line without noise and meant it. That kind of presence carries weight. Steven didn't seek attention afterward. He didn't capitalize on the moment or allow it to define him. He spoke when necessary, listened more than he talked, and carried himself with the same composed restraint. That consistency mattered. It reinforced what people had already sensed. His behavior wasn't situational. It was who he was. Over time, the atmosphere around him adjusted naturally. People gave him space, not out of fear but respect. Conversations lowered slightly when he was nearby. Eye contact lingered a bit longer. There was no challenge in it, no hostility, just acknowledgement. In a place where dominance is often loud and unstable, his quiet authority stood out. The bullies, meanwhile, adapted. They didn't retaliate. They didn't escalate. They moved on. That alone spoke volumes. In prison, unresolved tension usually resurfaces. But this time it didn't, because the matter hadn't been left unfinished. It had been settled decisively, without force, without humiliation. Steven had given them an exit, and they took it. What remained was an unspoken agreement. Boundaries had been established, and everyone understood them. No one had lost face publicly. No one had been embarrassed beyond repair. That balance was intentional. Steven understood that real resolution leaves no need for revenge. Days passed, then weeks, and the incident became part of the environment, a quiet reference point rather than an ongoing threat. People didn't talk about it openly, but they remembered. They adjusted how they interacted. They learned, without being told, that pushing certain boundaries came with consequences, even when those consequences weren't loud or immediate. Steven's influence grew not through intimidation, but through consistency. He treated people fairly. He didn't posture. He didn't dominate conversations or assert control unnecessarily. And that made his presence even stronger. Because when someone who clearly can assert dominance chooses not to, it creates trust, and trust is rare in places built on survival. The bullies avoided him, but not awkwardly. More like professionals who recognize another professional. There was no resentment, only understanding. They had misjudged him once. They weren't interested in repeating that mistake. And that was the true resolution. Not victory, not defeat, but clarity. Steven had navigated a volatile situation without escalating it, without feeding ego, and without compromising his own principles. He had demonstrated that strength doesn't need to announce itself, and that control, real control, comes from knowing exactly when to act and when not to. In a place designed to strip people of identity, he had preserved his. The aftermath wasn't dramatic, but it was lasting. His days continued with fewer disruptions, fewer challenges, and a deeper sense of mutual recognition. He wasn't untouchable, but he was understood. And understanding changes everything. Because once people realize who you are, they stop trying to test it. Time has a way of revealing what moments truly matter. What began as an attempt to humiliate a quiet man slowly transformed into something far greater, a lesson that echoed far beyond that single encounter. The incident didn't end with noise or spectacle. It ended with understanding. And understanding, when it comes to power, leaves a deeper mark than force ever could. Steven Seagal never spoke about what happened. He never claimed victory. He never allowed the moment to define him. And that was precisely why it mattered. In a place where identity is often shaped by conflict, he chose a different path. He allowed his actions, or rather, his restraint, to speak for him. Over time, people didn't remember him for confrontation. They remembered him for composure, for presence, for the quiet certainty that followed him wherever he went. The bullies moved on, carrying with them a lesson they didn't expect to learn. Not about defeat, but about perception. They had mistaken silence for weakness and calm for fear. What they discovered instead was something far more unsettling. True strength doesn't need to prove itself. That realization stayed with them. Others noticed it too. New faces came and went. The environment changed, but the respect remained. Steven's name became associated not with dominance, but with balance. Not with aggression, but with control. In a place where chaos is constant, that reputation is rare and powerful, because real influence isn't built in moments of anger. It's built in moments of choice. Steven chose restraint when provocation would have been easier. He chose clarity when confusion ruled the room. And in doing so, he shifted the narrative, not just about himself, but about what strength truly looks like. The encounter faded into memory, but its impact didn't. It became a quiet reminder to those who witnessed it. Power isn't always visible. Sometimes it stands still, observes, and waits. Sometimes it speaks softly, and sometimes it doesn't speak at all. Steven continued his days with the same steady presence. He didn't seek respect, it followed naturally. He didn't demand space, it was given. And he didn't chase authority, it settled around him like a shadow. That was his legacy. Not fear, not dominance, but understanding. In the end, the story was never really about bullies or prisons. It was about perception, about how quickly people judge and how dangerous those judgments can be. It was about the quiet strength that exists beneath the surface, unnoticed until tested. And when tested, unshaken. This wasn't a story of violence. It was a story of mastery. Mastery of the self. Mastery of emotion. Mastery of the moment. Because the strongest person in the room isn't always the loudest. It's often the calmest. And once people realize that, they never forget it.